Welcome to Happy to See Me, the podcast that puts the spotlight on the overlooked and underestimated. I'm Erika Casupanan, the first Canadian to win Survivor. But before that, I was a Filipino immigrant and corporate perfectionist who felt doubted and overlooked. Now I'm here to prove that every journey, whether messy, beautiful, or unexpected, is worth celebrating. Every Monday, I bring you candid conversations and relatable pep talks with guests who've defied expectations. If you're ready to feel seen, celebrated, and empowered, you're in the right place. And here, I'm always happy to see you. June is Pride Month, and it's Filipino Heritage Month. And I know that I've talked a lot on this podcast about queer identity, and I've talked about the experience of being Filipino. But I haven't really talked about the intersectionality of managing both identities. And depending on the person, maybe one identity could have more prominence in a person's life at a certain point in their life versus another identity. And that's what we're talking about today, managing those two identities and finding a way for them to coexist instead of having one feel like it's bigger than the other at all times. And I am talking about that today with this week's guest, Cal Campos. But first, I love to start each episode by talking about something I was happy to see this week. And honestly, as I sat down to record this, and I normally love sitting down to speak to you and share the thing I was happy to see, I sat down and I just thought, I've got nothing. And don't worry, truly, don't worry. I am fine. Don't worry. I think it's one of those things where I've just been working so much and I've been so ready for that summer relief. And I'm in Toronto and it has been extremely gray and cold, unseasonably cold and rainy here. And I know that a few weeks ago on the podcast, I was saying I was so happy to see the sun. Well, I haven't seen the sun in a while. So I'm kind of in, I don't want to say a funk, but I'm in a moment where I feel like I'm just working a ton, looking out the window. I am not seeing the sun. It is all gray. And I'm really wanting that relief from summer and from Pride Month. And I just want to feel it. And it hasn't happened yet. So if you're in Toronto or if you're in a place that's experiencing a lot of grayness right now, let me know if you can relate. So truly, don't worry. I am fine. I feel like as soon as I see the sun through the clouds or as soon as I get a bit of relief in terms of work, luckily I should be able to have a fun summer. I should be okay. But yeah, I hope that at least makes somebody listening feel better to know that it's okay to be in these funks and in these ups and downs. And I think that if I had to choose something I was happy to see, it's being able to talk to all of you about that now, right? I think especially with a podcast called Happy to See Me, sometimes I feel the pressure to make sure I am showing up happy and positive all of the time. I certainly put that pressure on myself for a while. And I am happy to see that, you know what? I trust all of these shining stars who are listening. I know everyone listening to this podcast is amazing and understandable. So yeah, I'm going to say I'm happy to see that I could just show up as I am and tell you all. I don't have a big highlight this week, but I'm still doing okay. And we're going to get through until the sunshine. So that's what I was happy to see. And I am actually also extremely happy to share this episode with you. This is an extremely vulnerable interview and truly one that's personal to me and one of my favorite interviews I've done over the last couple of years. In this interview, I'm speaking with Cal Campos, who is a producer and an inclusivity speaker. And Cal has been talking about their identity as a Philippine X person, a queer person, and a trans person, and has been making spaces for braver storytelling among marginalized communities for the last decade. And I want to tell listeners, this is a very vulnerable episode. So get ready to listen to us open up and speak from the heart. Cal opens up about coming into their queerness very, very young and feeling like their Filipino-ness and their queerness couldn't coexist, and often feeling like the queerness had to push the Filipino-ness aside in order for the queerness to really be present and take hold and feel right to them. And Cal opens up about the unfortunate parts with coming out, like getting outed at school or not having parental approval, and even growing up and learning to forgive their parents. And truly, I think you will get something out of this episode. Yes, of course, if you identify as queer or if you're Filipino. But even if you have neither identity, what this episode is really about is intersectionality in being able to manage the feeling of being between multiple identities and maybe feeling like you're not enough of the one and you're not enough of the other, and you're trying to find a way to fit in the world and truly just be yourself. And if you know someone who's dealt with that feeling of trying to fit in and trying to feel like you're enough for one identity and enough of another identity, or if they're queer or Filipino, send this episode to them because they could get something out of this heartfelt conversation. But why don't we just get into it? Here is my interview with Cal Campos. I hope you enjoy it. I'm so pumped to meet you. Finally. I've been following you for a while. Mm-hmm. My kababayan.
Yeah. I don't know what you said there.
You don't know?
No, I actually don't know what you said.
Okay.
I was like, I should probably just be transparent that I don't know what you said there.
Okay, this is good. This is part of the conversation.
Great.
So kababayan, Tagalog word, it's kind of like saying like my Filipino countrymen, and it's not like a gendered word, but it's more like my fellow Filipino.
Oh, I appreciate that.
So my kababayan.
Po? Not
yes.
Po? Yeah.
But I don't know how to say you're welcome.
I think it's mabuti or
walang ano. No, don't
like
think
no
about
worry,
it.
yeah.
Don't think about it. No worries.
Yeah.
Okay, this is perfect for this conversation.
I'm just learning my first words in Tagalog, so.
Okay. I want to get into this because we are talking about your experience with your queerness growing up and your experience with your Filipino heritage. You've told me this incredible story about you growing up and as you're still going on this journey. So before we get into this podcast is about people who have been overlooked or underestimated in some way. So I want to know, have you ever felt underestimated? And if you have, can you share a moment when you did?
Yeah. I was reflecting on this, and it's interesting. Underestimation, I don't know, not to sound dramatic, but I'll say it. I feel like that's kind of been an underlying theme my entire life. But I never really got to sit and think about it until I was asked by you. And more recently, I'm trying to learn more about neurodiversity and neurodivergence. And I think that's also been something that's been coming up for me of maybe my brain being different than other folks. And I've just been reflecting on my friendships in the last handful of years, and just the idea of being different and being like, oh, you can't do A, B, and C action because you're different. And I think that's been also a theme throughout my life too of, oh, you can't be a successful person, whatever that means within the eyes of the person, because, for example, you're a lesbian, or because you're a person of color, or you're a girl, right? So I'll give a bit more history with that. But yeah, it's kind of been an underlying experience for a long time.
Well, for one, I don't think it's dramatic to say that it's been an underlying experience. I have built an entire podcast around the idea of being underestimated. So
thank you.
If you're dramatic, so am I.
Right.
The other thing is, as you're talking about all these realizations about yourself, because it sounds like there's these moments where you feel like you're underestimated. Maybe you're not quite sure if you're like everybody else or doing the right thing. But it seems like every time you run into these feelings, you take it as an opportunity to get to know yourself better and to keep growing. So it sounds like a journey of continuous growth for you.
It is, yeah. And I try to think of growing and like the evolution of myself as an ongoing thing till my last breath. And I don't know if I ever want it to be a day where I'm not learning or growing. Because, yeah, I think it's really beautiful that I'm constantly evolving and changing. And that dynamic kind of experience of what life is.
Yes. Can you tell the listeners a bit about your journey and what should they know about you and your pursuit of growth?
Yeah, no, great question. My name is Cal. My pronouns are they and them. I like to position myself when I'm, coming into any conversation whenever I can. I am transgender. I am assigned female at birth. The first 18, 19 years of my life, I identified as a woman and as a girl. So that's something that I hold very dearly and close to me. I am non-binary, I think I may have said. I'm queer. I'm bisexual. I am also a settler here on Takaranto, on Turtle Island. I am able-bodied and I'm neurodivergent, and that's a new word that I'm using to describe myself. In terms of what I'd love folks to know as they're listening to this today, I really hope that me being a bit vulnerable today, or me being very vulnerable today, just brings a little bit of insight. Maybe if you haven't heard a story like mine before, or maybe if you're going through something similar, I think it's important for us to hear from one another. And I hope that it brings a bit of peace or calm with whatever you're going through.
So where should we begin? Should we talk about you growing up and you really realizing that queerness was part of your identity? Yeah. Would that be a good place to start?
That'd be great. Yeah. So the first time that I realized I was attracted to girls. So to backtrack again, as I said right at the beginning, assigned female at birth, first 18, 19 years of my life identifying as a girl and as a woman, didn't have any questions about my gender. And I think it was in kindergarten when I had my first crush on a girl. And at first I thought, oh, I just want to be best friends with this person. I remember following her around in like the classroom and like wanting to play and whatever. And then a few years ended up passing and I was like, no, I think that was a crush. But kind of throughout my life and as a really young kid, I only saw one type of representation. I grew up fairly religious. I grew up in the Catholic Church. There's like a lot of intersections that play into this, but being Filipino and having being colonized by the Spanish, we have like a lot of culture, just for, I guess, folks listening at home, if they don't know that background. Being Filipino sometimes can be really intertwined with being Catholic. So I grew up in a very, very Catholic household. And yeah, I think just representation wise, I only saw men and women get married. I was going to church every single Sunday since the moment I was born. I grew up in a very, very practicing household. And so even the idea of me having a crush on another girl wasn't an option. I was like, that's not something that happens. And then I think it was around grade 4 when people started saying, that's so gay. And I started kind of putting those pieces together and I started questioning, what does it mean to be gay and whatnot. And that's when I realized I think I'm gay. And I've been having crushes on girls for years now, from kindergarten to grade 4. And I was thinking, okay, I don't want to be gay because people are saying that's so gay to describe that something is bad. They would use it as like a slur or a negative thing. And so from there, I just started this journey of I can't be gay. And that was a very, very big part of my brain growing up. Any point that I could, I would try to either pray to God and ask him to make me straight, or just try to ignore crushes I had on girls. And that took up a lot of my brain space. That kind of continued on all the way up until grade 8. And I kept telling myself, I don't want to ever tell anyone that I'm gay. But it got to the point where my mental health was really bad. And I was really worried about the safety of my own life. And I decided I'm going to hurt myself if I don't tell someone about this. So I came out for the first time when I was 13.
Wow.
And I told my good friend, we were in grade 8. It was recess. I remember I think it was January 10th, 2011, if I'm not mistaken. And I sat her down. I told her that I was a lesbian. And I was very lucky. I knew that she was really supportive before I came out to her, but I told her and she said that she loved me and nothing was going to change. And then from there, I continued telling different people in my class. We had like a small graduating class. And then I was out to my graduating class. When I went off to high school, I went to a different high school than where all my other friends ended up going. And so people didn't know that I was gay, and I kind of needed to figure out if it was safe to come out again. And unfortunately, what ended up happening was someone from my graduating class ended up outing me. So told someone at my school that I was gay. And that just, I think maybe people can assume how that went, but it was within 24 hours, the entire school knew that I was gay. And I had just lost everything I'd built up to that point. I was trying to get really, really involved, make new friends. Student council was a big part of my life. Just clubs, councils, sports teams were a big part of my life. And, all the friendships I had made up to that point were just completely lost. Started getting pretty severely bullied. And high school was a very big survival chapter for me. After I graduated, I kind of really just wanted to leave that in the past. And that's when I ended up being outside of that school system. And I went off to university, and that's where I was actually able to meet people from different places and spaces and parts of the world if they were coming from different countries. And this is where I actually started learning about gender identity and that someone could be transgender. And that's when I came to terms with being trans. So yeah, I think that's, I could drone on and on about that part of my life, but I think that was a really big part of my queerness. Just being queer and being a lesbian at that time was a very, very big part of what took up my brain space and surviving, and how do I fit into all these boxes that people need me to fit into.
Thank you for being so generous with sharing that. I'm sorry about all of the struggle, right? You talked about being outed and the bullying, but even the internal struggle you had for so long as a kid when, we're kids. We're not cognitively able to really deal with all of those things and process all those things. So I'm sorry that you went through that. It's incredible that you got through that. And then now you're able to share this story and to inspire other people. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Thanks, Erika. That means a lot to me. Yeah, I've sat with it a lot. I've told that story quite a bit, but it's good to pause and acknowledge that it's still a real thing. So thank you. That means a lot to me.
Of course. I felt like I could relate to a lot of what you were saying. I mean, our stories are a little different.
Yeah.
You figured out early on that you were queer. For me, I was in my 30s when I figured it out. So 30 years after you, I figured it out. But when you said, I never really knew it was an option, that really struck a chord with me because truly for me, I just never even knew it was an option. I think that when I was younger, there was virtually no representation of lesbians. And then as I got older, I had a lot of queer friends, but they were primarily queer men. So again, even though I knew that lesbians exist and it was fine to be a lesbian, I just never even had exposure to it. I just never even knew it was an option. And my parents were extremely strict. My parents also went to Catholic church. I went to Catholic school, again, very Filipino. So that was also just not even an option at all. So I think that that's something as I get older, I have to really process, and I can have compassion for myself to know that it took me a while because I didn't know it was a process. Sorry, I didn't know that it was an option.
Yeah.
So hearing you say that it wasn't an option for you, I was like, oh, okay. I'm not the only one who felt like this. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that as well. And it's interesting because from the a little bit of conversation that we've had before this, it looks like there's just kind of opposites, sort of, like contrast with that.
So did your Filipino heritage affect your ability to really access and come to terms with your queerness?
Yeah. I think the religion part was a big part of it, and that kind of being synonymous, at least for me in my brain, with being Filipino. That I think that played a big part. I also went to Catholic school, and I mean, I just like the systems that I was in was it didn't allow for me to talk about things openly or to explore things openly in a way that felt safe. And so I think being Filipino and how much my parents kept talking about being Filipino and Catholic at the same time, and those things together felt like it was like pushing out space for me being queer and saying, how can, at least for myself, I would ask myself, how can both of these things exist? How can I be both Filipino and Catholic and gay? And that was a really difficult dance to do for a very long time. And only in the last few years have I been starting to unpack that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. This is the first time I've heard someone say that being Catholic and being Filipino are synonymous, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense too. And I think also growing up and going to Catholic school, I just thought that was the world. We all know all the words to Our Father. We all know Hail Mary. That's just what life is. I didn't realize that there was anything outside of it. And my parents still go to church. I don't go to church anymore. And I think that as I got older and I started to veer away from going to church and realizing that I could be Filipino, I think that also created some space too for me to figure out my queerness.
Yeah.
Okay, so if the Catholic Church and the Filipino heritage are kind of pushing against your queerness, does that mean that your queerness took center stage for you and you weren't really paying attention to the other two as much? Like, how did that come into play?
Yeah. Thank you for asking with that. Yeah, that was such a big part of it. I think, at least sometimes when I think about identity and for me, like my relationship with identity, if you think about like an identity, what's it called? Like, it's not a wheel, but kind of like a web, I guess. Like if you have like yourself and then all the different parts of you. I just felt like queerness was such a big part of it. And I know that I just said that being Filipino and Catholic was trying to like almost like push out my queerness in that sense. But because of how much queerness I think took a space in my brain, it felt like it was overshadowing being Filipino. And so I didn't even really think twice about being Filipino or that part of my identity because I was so stressed about getting rid of being gay.
Yeah.
So there just was not space at all to even think about that part of myself or, ways in which I did experience microaggressions, like people commenting on food and anything of that sort, because it was just so minuscule compared to my queerness.
Do you feel like you're more in touch with your Filipino heritage now? Or is that something that you want to be more in touch with?
Yeah. I like roughly the last 3 years have been a really, really big transforming time. Yeah. Okay. I couldn't find the word there. But yeah, no, it's been really, really big the last 3 years. Yeah. In particular, being able to really pause and look back at what happened when I was a kid and asking myself, what does forgiveness look like? I think that is a really, really big part of it. Forgiveness, shame, anger. And if I forgive, I think for a long time I thought that if I forgave, for example, my parents, that would be me giving up my power. I think of like my inner child and my inner teenager a lot. And 3 years ago, I sat down my inner teenager and I said, I think we need to forgive mom and dad. And they were pissed. They were not happy about that. They're like, if we forgive mom and dad, they're going to think that it was okay that, A, B, and C thing happened to us. And I just had like a big like sobbing cry. And I said, I'm the adult of us too. And I'm like, this is, I think, what we need to do in order to move forward and to find peace. And I think forgiveness is about getting peace for yourself and less about if someone deserves that. And that was a big conversation I had to have with myself. So about 3 years ago, I forgave my parents in my body, but also verbally to them.
Wow.
And that it was interesting. That's when they started using my pronouns. It was a very, very interesting turn of events because I said, I just have to accept that my parents aren't going to be the people that I've always wanted them and needed them to be. But when I guess there was like space for that forgiveness and softness, things started clicking for them. It was really, really interesting. And then from there, that's when I said, okay, maybe I can explore what it means to be Filipino because there's more softness and there's just space in general for me to explore what does that mean outside of feeling like these different parts of me are clashing with one another.
Wow. I'm sure for a lot of people listening, it sounds like you tackled something that seems unsurmountable, right? I think a lot of people believe that their relationship with their parents, it just is what it is. That's just the way they are. I don't think it's going to change. Can you share a bit about what the before state was like? And yes, you forgave them. Do you think that is what clicked for them to start to accept you, or?
That's a great question. I'm not too sure. I think, I guess to answer your question with the before part of that, it was really, really difficult. I didn't, when I gave kind of the overview of coming to terms with my queerness and what that looked like for me in the first roughly 18, 19 years of my life, I didn't talk about coming out to my parents. So I also came out to my parents when I was 13. And that was the summer before I went into high school. And essentially what happened was I was telling myself, okay, I know that this is not going to be good. Like I knew it based off the conversations that were happening at home, comments that my mom and my dad would make. But I said, if something bad happens in high school, I really want my parents to support me. And maybe this is going to be a turning leaf for us if I come out to them. I came out to them, and in a nutshell, without going into the details, like I nearly lost my origin family because of that. And kind of I think that was the last straw for me. Like I had a difficult time opening up to my parents already in general. But when that happened, I completely shut off from my parents. I just really, my plan from then on out was to turn 18, move out, and not talk to my parents again. And so it was a very hostile relationship of me not wanting to talk to them. If we did talk, like it would very easily escalate into yelling matches or me just like completely shutting down. And yeah, I would say that was kind of my relationship with them from 13 to maybe 23 or 24, and I'm 27 now. So again, the last 3 years roughly have been a really, really big change in things for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess with that strained relationship with your parents, it also makes sense why you might not have been very in touch with your Filipino heritage, right? Because for a lot of people, the entry point into their Filipino heritage is their family. So do you feel like there's something that you missed out on in terms of your Filipino-ness growing up?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for catching that. Because I think also when I think about being Filipino and the faith aspect of it, I also connect it to my parents. So I think all those three things kind of connected me pushing away. My parents also included pushing away being Filipino and my faith at the time. And yeah, I think there's honestly a lot of grief around feeling like there's so much time that I've lost with my parents. My father has Parkinson's. He's sick. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And he was diagnosed back in 2017. And that was honestly when I was in the midst of my wrath with my parents and just not even being able to see them as people with lives and experiences and traumas and their own stuff, right? I honestly grieve a lot, even like to this day, of the amount of time that's been lost because of the resentment. And I recognize, like, I hold all these things all at the same time, but I recognize that it doesn't fall on one person to blame or anything of that sort. That's just kind of how it's been set up for us, and we all navigated the best we possibly could. But yeah, I think right now a big focus in my life is how can we just build our relationship as healthy as we possibly can and make up for the time that we've lost as much as we possibly can, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, a lot of different moving parts in my life with that.
Yeah. I think I'm fortunate I came out when I was in my 30s. So at that point, it's like, it's different now, right?
Yeah.
I think my parents, they were like, cool. They were pretty chill about it. If I was younger, if I was your age and I did that, that would not have happened. That would not have been a thing. And I think that with me, even, already being someone known to the public, when I came out publicly, it was like, yay, everyone excited, praising me, headlines about me coming out. It was exciting. I'm like, oh, wow, I feel like I got to skip a few steps, if that makes some sense.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like I grew up and I was so Filipino. Like I knew I was different. I grew up in a white city, primarily Italian, which I think is the same.
Yes, same for me. Wow.
Very Italian, Catholic school, very different. Dealt with microaggressions. I don't blame any of the people I went to school with because we were just like young kids. So I feel like, like I always really knew I was Filipino, but I didn't have the crush when I was a kid. So sometimes I feel like I miss out on that like a little bit. So I feel like I'm almost making up for lost time.
Okay.
In terms of your Filipino-ness, is there something that you really want to do?
Ooh. Oh my gosh, great questions. Yeah, in terms of something I'd like to explore with being Filipino, I want to go back to the Philippines. The last time I went was when I was 19, so that was a little while ago. And there have been a few family trips that have happened since then, but I chose not to go for my mental health. And I think I'm in a much more present space where I don't feel like I have to just survive whenever I'm in those places and spaces, where I can actually, hopefully, enjoy and really take in the culture of being Filipino and like maybe practice some of my Tagalog and just be present with cousins and family and extended family. Yeah, that's something I want to do. And yeah, I think that's a big thing. I think also too, I want to continue my learning and journey with learning about Filipino history, especially with Indigenous Filipino history and queerness and transness within that. There's just so much queerness and transness within Indigenous Filipino history, which is so cool. And that's helped me feel really connected to ancestors. So yeah, that's like a big part of my own journey with it.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, it seems like you're going to be able to come around to it and realize that there was actually a place for your queerness after all.
Yeah.
When you move beyond the small peanut that we lived in growing up, that we thought this was it, when you move beyond, you see there's so much rich culture.
Yeah. Thank you for asking all that. I really appreciate that. I wanted to ask because I'm curious if you're, again, comfortable.
I mean, if I will answer, and if there's something I don't want to say, then I won't say it.
Exactly.
It's my podcast.
Good.
I'll edit it out.
You can absolutely do whatever you want on your own podcast. I love that. For you, I know that you said you said you didn't have like the crushes growing up. Is that what I heard?
So I felt like there were girls who I thought were so cool and so pretty, but I think I didn't realize that they were crushes at the time. And I think it's because my parents were so strict that even doing the quote unquote normal thing and dating boys was just such a hassle. Like I felt like I just really wanted to do that so I could be quote unquote normal and fit in, that there wasn't even the space for me to even realize that there was something else. You know, I felt like I was so kind of like suffocated into like, this is who you are. This is what life is like. This is what you can do and this is what you can't do. So I just didn't even have space. But when I think about it, when I was a kid, I was like, yeah, there's totally people who I thought were like super cool and super pretty, but just never went further.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And do you find that like your relationship with queerness and being Filipino, did they ever really overlap for you?
So I always made this joke growing up that Filipino people and gay people have the same taste in music.
That's so funny. I love that. No, I love it.
We love a pop diva.
We do love a pop diva. That's great. I love that.
We love a pop diva. And I remember once I was at my aunt's house and we found some home video and we put it in the VCR and it's a bunch of people having a party. So she lived in Toronto and had roommates who were gay men. And it was this house party they were having and there were drag queens at the party. And I remember my siblings and I asking our parents like, oh, how come there are these men dressed as women? And they were like, oh yeah, they're just having fun. Yeah. And I remember going to retirement parties and there would be a drag queen. And this is like a very, very old woman throwing a party. There'd be a drag queen. So I think that there was always like room for the flamboyant part of queer culture and the drag and gay men. That was part of it. And I feel like that didn't seem weird for me. But then again, never really interacted with it, with my Filipino-ness when it came to relationships or dating or love, and especially never women. I never ever pictured women intersecting with it. So because of that, I always grew up and I was like, oh yeah, like gay people are fine. Let's forget everything about what I learned in Catholic school. But I was like, yeah, like gay people are fine. That's cool. But I never even thought it could be me based on what I saw.
Okay, interesting. It's interesting the almost like selective representation
Yes, yeah.
of the 2S LGBTQ plus community. That's really, really interesting. But that makes sense.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that until you pointed that out, of like the flamboyant like man, for
Yeah.
example. Yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah, there's lots of, for as long as I can remember, I would hear about drag queens from the Philippines. I feel like that's such a normal part of the culture, but I've never really thought of it beyond the party drag aspect of it.
Yeah. What has been a big part of you kind of reclaiming the time that you said that you're trying to make up for lost time?
Ooh, I think that it's been... I mean, not so much going out. I think last year I was like, let me try to go out. But I feel like now I'm 35, so cool. I haven't been going out as much. But I think it's like trying to make more queer friends. And then I think even being able to, just little things like being able to talk openly about, like, how I would describe it is, I remember, you know, all those years of being an adult, so out of school, being an adult, and then being in groups of women, whether it's at work or with my friends or whatever, and everyone's talking about the men that they think are hot.
Right.
And I would go through my head, I'd be like, okay, the conversation's going to come to me. Who do I talk about? Who do I say? Because even though, and like that didn't even clue into me that was a thing. But I was like, okay, this is my go-to celebrity crush, and this is who I talk about.
Yeah.
So I think for me, something now that's really fun is being able to just like openly talk about people. You know what I mean? Openly talk about like, oh my God, she's hot, or this person. So just like little things like that. I think I've been fortunate that I've lived a life with lots of adventure and experiences, but I think it's being able to have a bit more freedom in the things that I just regularly do has been really nice.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And just the joy that comes with those, like, I guess being able to tell your friend like, hey, this person's cute, and like, and feel like that's like actually an authentic comment that you're making. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
I'm interrupting myself to share something you might not know about me. I'm a low-key gym girly. Even though I never played sports growing up, I got really into working out when I became a quote-unquote real adult. And now I work out almost every day, which means I need to take my supplements every day. And my favorite supplement brand is Organica. Organica supplements are made in Canada, and they've been super easy to add into my daily routine. So right now, I'm taking their collagen to help with my skin, creatine to help with muscle building, and electrolytes to help with my hydration. Right now, I've been on a big strength training kick, and I've been feeling stronger and more energized every day. If you want to try Organica, I've got a code for 25% off at Organica.com. My code is Erika_25. That is ERIKA_25 for 25% off at Organica.com. By using the code, you are supporting me and the show. So thank you so much for supporting me. Now let's go back to the show. But I feel like I still am having these moments when it comes to my Filipino-ness too, because growing up as one of the few Filipino kids in school, you had the same experience.
I had the same experience, yeah.
You kind of get used to being different and feeling like little bits of shame. So did your family ever cook daing?
Daing?
It's like a fish that you would eat for breakfast.
Oh. Like a salty one?
It's like a salty fish, yeah.
I think the small ones?
They're bigger.
No. Okay.
And the big thing is they would make the house smell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I remember it was like a huge, big deal if my family was cooking daing. It was like, okay, we have to shut the windows. No, sorry, open the windows.
Yes.
Shut the doors to all the bedrooms. Often they would cook this fish outside. My family didn't go camping, but they had like a camping stove in the garage where my dad would cook the fish.
Yeah.
And then it was just like a big thing because my family was like, we can't be like smelly. And I was at a Filipino event a few weeks ago at a Filipino restaurant, and there's all these Filipino women there. And we're looking at the breakfast menu, and then we're like, I think we're all going to get the daing. And it was like really nice to eat this fish without shame as an adult.
Yeah, that's really beautiful and sounds healing.
Yes.
I think that's been a big part of my own journey in the last few years too, of food. And kind of what you said, I also grew up in a predominantly white community, also Italians. And yeah, I remember telling my parents, like, I don't want to bring Filipino food to school because everyone keeps questioning it or saying that it's gross or asking why it smells a certain way or looks a certain way or anything of that sort. Something that I've been reflecting on a lot is like me as a kid, and of course I didn't know that I was doing this, but me as a kid bringing racism into my home and how that's like affected the way that my parents navigate even interacting with other people. I know that my mom apologizes a lot to people when it comes to smells, or like food smells, like especially fish and things like that. So that's been something I've talked to my parents about, and I've been looking for more Filipino friends. I kind of how you're talking about like making up for lost time. I also feel like I'm making up for lost time in finding community in Filipino folks, also within our generation or like the generation that's not our parents, like the younger generation of Filipinos, because I think that's it sounds like when I keep talking to folks, that's where it looks like there's a lot of common ground. Sometimes it could be different from person to person, but yeah, that's been really healing. Also cooking Filipino food with friends. Yeah, it's been beautiful.
I have a similar experience where whenever someone would come over, the way my family would prepare, if it was a Filipino person coming over versus if it was a white person coming over, if it was a white person coming over, it was like, okay, this is like, we really gotta like get this house together and, you know, make it seem like we're like a quote unquote normal, even though my parents never used those words. I think just watching their behavior, that's what I internalized, thinking like, okay, we have to look like a normal family for these white people to come over.
Yeah.
And I don't blame my parents for having that feeling. I think we're all just trying to survive and fit in and, you know, be part of the tribe and do whatever. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of stuff that I would realize as an adult and then have to unlearn and then come to terms with and then realize that it's okay to be who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I've been working on that a lot more of the not apologizing part of it. And it's hard. I'm still kind of sensitive to food, but I've been a lot more open about that to close friends and community, and everyone's been great. So I've been just like that healing part of being able to talk about it, and it's like scary, but it's gotten easier these last 3 years with that. So
have you made something that's Filipino that you're really proud of?
For the first time I cooked sinigang with my other Filipino friend and then my other friend who's white, and it was actually really healing, especially to introduce sinigang to a friend who was white. And for them to be so enthusiastic and so excited to just learn about what that meant to me or to my other friend who's Filipino. And so now that's been an even more special food. I really liked sinigang growing up.
Yeah.
But now there's a little bit more story to it and my relationship to it. So I love sinigang.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Is there a part of your journey that you're really proud of?
That's a great question. I think it is the forgiving of my parents. I'm someone who believes in multiple timelines. Like I'm a quite spiritual person. I've been relearning my understanding of spirituality and faith and how that fits in my life. Because for a long time I was really like, this is not for me. But I do believe in multiple timelines and multiple versions of myself kind of existing on different planes. And I honor the version of myself that didn't forgive my parents. I think they are just as valid as this version of me who did choose to forgive my parents. Like a big part of forgiving my parents for me within this lifetime was choosing whether or not I wanted to have a relationship with my 15-year-old sibling. And if I decided to cut off my family, I'd also be cutting them off. And it was really one of those moments where I'm like, okay, time to be a big kid and be an adult. And this is a big decision. And for me, I said, okay, the version that I want to be is still in the life of my sibling. So that was really, really hard for me. Definitely had to do a lot of therapy, a lot of work. Still always on that healing journey. But I'm really, really proud of that. I think that is something that younger me would have never, ever believed if I told them that. So, yeah.
That's a huge milestone.
Thank you.
I know you do a lot of work in terms of speaking and representing the queer community. And within the queer community, and I think even within the Filipino community, it's really common to have difficult relationships with parents. Do you have advice for anyone who might be listening and they're not sure if they want to be forgiving their parents?
Yeah. My advice is that there's no right way to go about it. I think, we're just given situations and we navigate the best we possibly can. And I think at the end of the day, it's never me or anyone else to tell someone what they should do, because only you're going to live your specific life with all the different intersections of your identity, your relationship with your parents, how that felt, what that looked like for you, how that manifested in your body, etc. And so I think the advice is that, one, there's no right or wrong way to go about it. You're going to know what you need to do, and that can change too. Maybe you make one decision, and then later down the road, you're like, actually, never mind, and I'm going to change that, and that's okay. And then I think number two is give yourself lots of compassion and a lot of love. And it's really, really, really hard. And there's been one quote that's really been sitting with me. It goes, you can't hate yourself into loving yourself. And that's been really still something that I'm working on of not like bullying myself of like, why did I do this or what did that or anything. So really just trying to give yourself lots of space and grace during it, because it's really difficult. And best of luck if anyone listening is going through that. And I'm sending lots of care and lots of love, because I know it's been a really difficult journey for me, so I can only empathize with others who are on that journey too.
Yeah. Self-compassion is so important, right?
Yeah.
No matter what someone decides and what the outcome is, please have compassion for yourself. You can't control what happens. You can just control what you do, and if you give it your very best.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to ask you, it's going to be a 3-part question.
Okay.
This is the first part of the question. What is a conversation that you think we should have more within the queer community?
Great question. I think we need to talk more about intersectionality. I love, love, love that in the past, how many years have I been out now? Over a decade now. Things have changed. There's a lot more representation in media, in stories, in parties and spaces, and etc. And I think there needs to be more conversation around disability advocacy, Black, Indigenous, people of color, just so many different intersections. And I don't think that there's enough. And an understanding that even though we are a part of a marginalized community, it doesn't mean that we cannot hurt others or also act racist, be ableist, be sexist, anything of that sort. So I think that conversation needs to continue happening. And yeah, I think that's the next step, hopefully. Hopefully that's the next step. Yeah.
Okay. I love that. Here's part 2, and then I think you'll be able to guess what part 3 will be.
Okay.
So part 2 will be, what conversations do you think we should have more of within the Filipino community?
Oh, being someone who's like earlier on my journey with learning about my own relationship to being Filipino, I think conversations about history would be really great. Something that was so eye-opening for me was learning about Indigenous Filipino history and being able to tell my parents, hey, there were actually really powerful and celebrated trans queer people within Filipino history, especially before colonization with the Spanish. And it was because of colonization that, for example, these trans healers essentially were wiped out from history. And I wonder if that information was actually available for my parents, if there would have been a different idea of what it meant to be queer or trans. So I think more conversations about history and decolonizing would be really, really cool.
Yeah, I think that a lot of Filipino people are trying to just move on from the hard parts of Filipino history, right? Like colonization is such a hard part for people to talk about. Even going through dictatorships, that's so hard to talk about. Right. But it's something that I think a lot of young Filipinos, and I'd consider both of us young still, really want to learn about, right? Yeah. I've interviewed so many Filipino people. Every single one thinks that they're not Filipino enough. And I think that we all want to know this history. We all want to learn that. And I think it could help us to all feel more connected to the culture. So yeah, totally agree.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's really, really special.
Okay, and the last one. What are more conversations we should be having within the Filipino queer community?
Yeah, I feel like that's even newer for me.
Yeah,
that's
same.
Right, okay, yeah, right. So we're on the same page.
we can problem solve it together.
Exactly,
we can brainstorm it together.
I think maybe that's the conversations that I would like to hear more of. I've been seeing it more of folks who are queer and Filipino finding each other and healing within community. And especially when I've been learning more about just indigeneity overall as someone who's not Indigenous, and just the roots of Indigenous communities being community and how there's a lot of healing within that. So I think sometimes it's easy to isolate and be like, I'm the only one who has this specific experience. But I think hopefully finding more of us and hopefully making more spaces where we can celebrate that and talking about our experiences, I think that would be really healing. Yeah.
Yes, we need more of the queer Filipinos. If anyone has a club in Toronto, let us know.
Let us know.
We'll go. I'm
so down.
signing you up for something. Right. We'll go.
Voluntold. No, I love that. I think that would be really, really wonderful.
Because I think all the things that you identified in this conversation, the Catholicism and the Filipino-ness, I think that affected a lot of our queer journeys, whether we realize it or not. So yeah, we need people to unpack that and people to enjoy sinigang with.
Yes. Oh, that would be so great. What is it? There's the, oh my gosh, the banana leaf.
Kamayan.
Kamayan.
Yes. Sign me up anytime.
Sign me up. We should do
If
that.
there's a club, sign us up. We're in.
Club for Kamayan. I'd love that.
Cal, thank you so much for chatting. Where can people keep up with you?
Yeah, you can find me on my website at calvincampos.com. So CalvinCampos.com, and on Instagram at calvin.campos.
I loved chatting with you. So this episode is coming out during June, which is going to be Pride Month and Filipino Heritage Month. Do you have any parting words for the listeners during this special month for our identities?
Oh, I think continuing to choose pride. I think that's been a big thing for me, and keep on having that open mind and learning about pieces that help you feel connected to your own identities, whether that's queerness or Filipino or the Philippines. For example, the word ingat, I learned that being like a word of solidarity, of telling folks to be safe.
Yeah.
That's special to me now when I tell my parents ingat. Yeah, so ingat to whoever's listening and navigating that.
Maraming salamat. Thank you so much, Cal. And thank you to everybody for spending a bit of time with me this week. I will be happy to see you next Monday.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Sonar Network.